My rich grandpa smiled and asked, "How do you spend your $3,400,000 trust fund?" I blinked. "What trust fund?" Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Clara Wren, and I've always lived a simple life in Kansas. My family has money, but I was never the favorite. I grew up feeling invisible, while my cousin Brent always got all the attention. He was charming, confident, and everyone in the family seemed to adore him. I tried to be happy for him, but there was always this sting of being overlooked. One day, out of nowhere, my grandfather Harold called me to his mansion. I hadn't seen him in months, and when I arrived, he looked at me with a smile I didn't understand. Then he said it, the $3,400,000 trust fund. No one had ever mentioned it before, and I felt like the floor had dropped beneath me. Brent was there too, pretending to be excited for me, but I could see the glimmer of greed in his eyes. He always thought he deserved everything, and now, apparently, he had plans to take this from me. At first, I didn't know who to trust. Papers went missing, advisors whispered behind my back, and Brent's smile never left his face. I felt betrayed, angry, and scared all at once. I realized my family didn't see me as someone who could fight for herself, but I wasn't going to let that stop me. I quietly reached out to Miles, the family lawyer who had always been fair to me, and June, the housekeeper who had been with the family for decades. Together, we started piecing together what Brent was planning, gathering evidence and figuring out a way to protect what was mine. It wasn't easy. Brent tried to manipulate every situation, spreading lies and thinking I would fall for them. But I learned to be patient and careful. I started setting small traps, letting family members see the truth of his schemes without him realizing it. Each step made me feel stronger and more in control. Then came the day I confronted my grandfather about everything, the betrayal, the favoritism, and the way my family had underestimated. He looked at me with regret and finally seemed to understand that I was no longer the powerless girl he thought I was. Brent thought he could outsmart me and take the money, but I had prepared for every move. When the final showdown came, the truth came out. Brent's lies, schemes, and manipulations were exposed. I gained full control of the trust fund, not just for the money, but for the respect and dignity I had been denied for so long. I chose to use it to help others who had been overlooked, proving that revenge isn't just about hurting someone. It's about rising above and creating something better. That day, I realized betrayal can hurt, but it can also make you stronger. Harold Wren had always carried himself with a quiet authority, a man whose presence filled every room he entered. To the outside world, he seemed unshakable, but I noticed the way his eyes softened whenever he spoke to Brent. My cousin always had a way of drawing people in, a smile that could charm anyone, and a voice that made his intentions seem innocent. But over time, I began to see cracks in that perfection. He thrived on control, quietly twisting situations to his advantage, and the family often overlooked the subtle ways he manipulated others. It wasn't until I stumbled across a box of old letters and financial papers in the attic that the truth hit me. My parents had been quietly edged out of their place in the family's wealth. Decisions had been made behind closed doors, and while it was never openly spoken, the evidence was clear. Documents showed assets and accounts that were reassigned, properties sold without their knowledge, and opportunities that were quietly redirected to Brent and others. My parents had never fought it, perhaps out of respect or fear, and I realized that I had been living in the shadow of a legacy I was never meant to inherit. Anger and disbelief surged through me. For years, I had assumed my family's indifference was ordinary, that I simply hadn't caught the family's attention. Now I understood the depth of the betrayal. Every subtle dismissal, every overlooked achievement, wasn't neglect, it was strategy. Brent's charm had been his weapon, and my parents' quiet nature had made them invisible. I felt a mix of grief for what they had lost and a rising determination to reclaim what was rightfully ours. I spent hours reading through the papers, piecing together the careful moves that had left my family on the sideline. It was almost like watching a game where I had been blindfolded, only now I could see every piece, every plan. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that nothing in this family came without careful calculation, and that I would need every ounce of cunning and patience if I wanted to navigate it. That discovery marked the beginning of a shift inside me. I could no longer remain the quiet observer. The betrayal ran deeper than I had imagined, and it wasn't just about money. It was about respect, recognition, and finally stepping into a place where I belong. The first steps toward claiming what had been hidden from me had begun, and I felt a spark of resolve I had never known before. The call came out of nowhere. I wasn't expecting to see my grandfather that day, and the sudden invitation felt strange, almost deliberate. Driving up to the mansion, I felt a mix of curiosity and unease. The estate looked just as imposing as always, with its manicured gardens and towering columns, but today it seemed quieter, almost waiting for something to happen. Inside, Harold greeted me with a nod and led me to his study. The air smelled faintly of old leather and polished wood, and the silence pressed against me. Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he mentioned it. "Clara, there's a trust fund for you, $3,400,000. His words hung in the air like a shockwave. I blinked, my mind scrambling. I don't understand," I said. No one had ever mentioned anything like that. All my life, I had assumed that wealth was for others in the family, not me. And yet, here it was, laid bare and untouchable unless I acted. Before I could gather my thoughts, I noticed Brent leaning casually against the doorway, a half-smile tugging at his lips. The gleam in his eyes made my stomach twist. He had heard every word. That smirk was a warning, a silent claim that he wouldn't let this opportunity go unnoticed. For the first time, I felt the invisible tension that had always existed between us materialize in front of me. This wasn't just about money. It was a test, and he was already playing his part. Harold spoke on, casually outlining the trust, but I hardly heard him. My mind raced with possibilities, questions, and the uneasy sense that everything in my life might be about to shift. Brent's presence made it impossible to ignore the stakes. He wasn't going to step aside quietly, that much was clear. Every instinct told me that this would be a turning point, that I had to be careful, and that the people I thought I could trust might soon be tested in ways I hadn't anticipated. By the time I left the mansion, the shock had settled into a mix of disbelief and determination. The trust fund was real, but so was the challenge of keeping it safe. Brent's smirk lingered in my mind, a reminder that nothing would come easily, and that I had just entered a quiet but dangerous battle within my own family. At first, Brent acted like he was happy for me. He offered congratulations, patted my back, and spoke in a tone so warm it almost fooled me. But little things started to slip through the cracks, things that didn't add up. A letter I had left on my desk vanished, a file that had been neatly organized suddenly went missing, and when I asked about it, the staff shrugged as if nothing had happened. Then came the whispers. Advisors and distant relatives spoke in hushed tones when they thought I wasn't listening, mentioning Brent's name with a kind of reverence I had never seen directed at me. He had quietly started building a network, lining people up to work in his favor. The realization hit me slowly, painfully. He had no intention of letting me have what was set aside for me. Every smile he offered now felt like a mask, every word carefully measured to conceal his true intent. I felt the walls of trust around me crumbling. The people I had believed to be neutral or supportive were quietly taking sides, and I could sense the subtle ways they moved to undermine me. My heart ached with disbelief and anger. It wasn't just about money. It was about respect, about being seen as capable and deserving, and now I understood how deep the betrayal ran. Each day brought more reminders. Documents shifted mysteriously, advice was skewed toward his plans, and even casual conversations seemed designed to catch me off guard. I felt isolated, as though I were standing alone in a house that had suddenly turned hostile. The betrayal wasn't loud or obvious, but it was relentless, creeping into every interaction and eroding my sense of security. By the end of that week, I understood something important. Family loyalty was fragile, and in my case, almost non-existent. Brent had shown me his true nature, and the quiet manipulation of everyone around him made me realize that if I wanted to survive this, I had to rely on myself. The weight of disappointment pressed heavily, leaving me exhausted and wary, but beneath it all, a small flame of determination began to burn. I couldn't undo the betrayals, but I could learn to navigate them, and one day, I vowed I would turn them into. I realized I couldn't face this alone. Quietly, I sought out Miles, a lawyer who had always treated me with respect and never let family politics cloud his judgment. He listened carefully as I explained the strange disappearances, the whispered conversations, and the subtle manipulations that seemed designed to edge me out. Miles didn't dismiss me, and that gave me a small but vital sense of hope. Next, I turned to June, the housekeeper who had been with the Wren family for decades. She had seen the patterns, the hidden tensions, and the ways decisions were made behind closed doors. I approached her carefully, knowing that trust was fragile. To my relief, she agreed to help, quietly observing, keeping notes, and warning me when something felt off. Together, we began piecing together a picture of what Brent had been planning. Old documents surfaced, receipts, and correspondence that revealed transactions I hadn't known about. Patterns emerged in how assets were shifted and how subtle suggestions from Brent influenced family decisions. Each new piece of evidence showed me the depth of the plotting I was up against. Working with Miles and June, I learned to notice details I had overlooked before. Every word, every gesture, and every sudden change in routine could carry a meaning I needed to understand. My perspective began to shift. Where I had once reacted out of confusion or fear, I now began to anticipate, to question, to strategize. This process wasn't easy. It required patience, careful observation, and a willingness to step quietly behind the scene. But with each discovery, I felt my confidence grow. I was no longer the passive observer in my family's drama. I was learning to protect myself, to read people, and to prepare for the inevitable moves Brent would make. By the time a few weeks had passed, I could see the transformation in myself. Fear and frustration had been replaced by vigilance and determination. I knew that the next steps would require careful planning, but with Miles and June by my side, I finally felt that I had the foundation to stand my ground, and maybe, just maybe, turn the tables. With the evidence Miles and June helped me gather, I began taking subtle actions that Brent wouldn't notice until it was too late. I started by questioning minor decisions in family meetings, carefully pointing out inconsistencies in Brent's reports and suggestions. Each time, I framed it as concern for the family's interests, never letting him suspect that I was deliberately undermining him. I also began redirecting opportunities he had assumed were his. A project he had been promised was quietly reassigned under my suggestion, citing my interest and unique insight. I watched as his confident expressions faltered, though he tried to mask it with casual laughter. Small victories accumulated, and each one strengthened my belief that I could hold my ground. Even outside the office, I set traps in everyday interactions. I asked precise questions during casual conversations, subtly revealing the gaps in Brent's statements to relatives who trusted his judgment. Slowly, the cracks in his facade widened, and I saw the first signs that the family was beginning to doubt his reliability. It was empowering to feel control where I had once felt powerless. For years, I had watched Brent manipulate situations and take what he wanted without consequence. Now, I was turning the tables quietly, methodically, without drawing attention to myself. The thrill of seeing his confident mask waver gave me a surge of satisfaction I hadn't expected. With each small success, my confidence grew. I realized that revenge didn't need to be loud or dramatic. It could be precise, calculated, and deeply effective. As Brent stumbled over his own schemes, I began to sense the shift in the household dynamic. People were watching, questioning, and starting to recognize the competence they had always overlooked in me. By the end of that first stage, I felt a quiet but powerful satisfaction. I was no longer just reacting to betrayal. I was creating consequences. Every move I made felt deliberate. Every small exposure of Brent's lies a step closer to reclaiming what I deserved. And in that silence, I began to understand the true weight of empowerment, the kind that comes not from anger alone, but from careful, patient strategy. I finally asked to speak with my grandfather alone. The moment felt heavy, the kind of tension that makes your chest tighten before words are even spoken. Harold listened quietly as I laid out everything I had discovered, the quiet manipulations, Brent's schemes, and the subtle ways the family had sidelined. My voice trembled at first, a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief, but I forced myself to keep going. Harold didn't interrupt, only letting his eyes meet mine as I spoke. When I finished, he exhaled slowly and admitted he had misjudged me, that he had assumed I would never stand up for myself in a world so dominated by charm and cunning. There was a flicker of sorrow in his expression, a recognition of the mistakes he had made by allowing favoritism and secrecy to dominate the family. "I never realized how much you had inside you," he said, his voice low. "I see now that the strength to protect yourself and to claim what's rightfully yours was always there. You have the power now, Clara. Don't let anyone take it from you." His words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just the money or the trust fund. It was the acknowledgement that I had been capable all along, and that my voice finally mattered. For a moment, I felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Relief that someone I respected recognized me, but also a deep sadness for all the years of doubt and neglect. I realized then that revenge wasn't just about reclaiming what Brent or the family had tried to take. It was about asserting my worth, demanding respect, and seeking justice for every subtle betrayal that had piled up over the years. That conversation changed something in me. The anger that had driven my first steps of revenge softened into clarity. I understood that the fight wasn't only about financial gain. It was about proving that I mattered, that manipulation and favoritism couldn't define my life. As I left Harold's study, I felt a strange mixture of empowerment and calm determination. The path ahead would still be challenging, but for the first time, I felt fully prepared to face it and to claim the respect I had always deserved. Brent had grown overconfident, convinced he had me cornered. He whispered to allies that I was naive, that I would never notice the loopholes he was planning to exploit. I watched him, outwardly calm, but every move he made only confirmed what I had suspected. He thought he could outsmart me. But I had spent weeks preparing, quietly coordinating with Miles to put safeguards in place. Legal papers were adjusted, clauses reinforced, and every potential backdoor he might try to slip through was closed before he even thought to test it. What he believed was an easy path to my inheritance had been anticipated from the start. The moment came when he tried to make his move, arranging a meeting with advisors to push through his plan. I walked in, calm and composed, and watched the confusion spread across his face as Miles presented the updated legal structure. Every attempt he had counted on to manipulate the outcome was nullified. His schemes, which he thought were invisible, were suddenly exposed not by accusation, but by the undeniable rules we had quietly reinforced. I could see the shock in Brent's eyes, a flicker of panic he struggled to hide. He had underestimated me completely. What had seemed like my vulnerability, my quiet demeanor, my cautious approach, had been a deliberate strategy. Every careful observation, every bit of evidence I had collected, had led to this moment of complete control. It wasn't just legal maneuvering, it was a demonstration of foresight. The very arrogance that had allowed him to believe he could take what was mine became his undoing. I stayed silent for a moment, letting him absorb the realization that his confidence had been misplaced, that I had been anticipating him the entire time. This was more than a victory for the inheritance. It was proof of my growth, the intelligence and strategy one had hidden under years of assumed passivity. Watching Brent falter, seeing the tables turn so completely, brought a quiet satisfaction. For the first time, I felt the power of being not just reactive, but prepared, proving that careful planning and patience could triumph over cunning arrogance. By the time the meeting ended, Brent had no choice but to retreat, his plans unraveling exactly as I had foreseen. I left with a steady calm, knowing I had not only protected what was mine, but also revealed a strength that no one, not even Brent, could ignore. The moment of reckoning arrived quietly but powerfully. Evidence I had carefully collected with Miles and June was presented in front of the family during a formal gathering. Every hidden transaction, every deceptive promise, and every manipulation Brent had attempted was laid bare. His confident smile faltered as whispers spread across the room, eyes turning toward him with disbelief and judgment. Brent tried to defend himself, but the truth was undeniable. The records, emails, and witness accounts left no room for excuses. His web of deceit unraveled piece by piece, and the charm he had relied on for so long now felt hollow. Family members who had once admired him shifted their attention toward me, the realization dawning that the person they had underestimated all these years had been the one quietly orchestrating justice. With the exposure complete, control of the trust fund was formally transferred to me. The legal groundwork Miles had prepared ensured there was no room for interference, and Harold, along with other senior family members, publicly acknowledged my rightful place. It was more than financial security. It was the recognition I had long been denied, the validation of my intelligence, patience, and persistence. A wave of relief washed over me. For years, I had carried a quiet weight, feeling invisible and powerless. Watching Brent falter, and the family acknowledge me brought a satisfaction deeper than I had anticipated. I felt a sense of dignity restored, a reclaiming of respect that no amount of money alone could provide. I stood quietly, absorbing the moment. The room's atmosphere shifted from tension to a solemn recognition of the balance that had been restored. Brent's betrayal had been harsh, but the careful way I had documented everything, anticipated his moves, and relied on trustworthy allies had ensured that justice was served without chaos or rash confrontation. Walking away that day, the trust fund secure and the family's acknowledgement finally earned, I realized something important. Revenge had never been about humiliation or anger alone. It was about setting things right, reclaiming what was mine, and proving that integrity and foresight could triumph over deceit. For the first time in my life, I felt entirely in control, not only of my inheritance, but of the narrative my family could no longer read. That evening, as I left the mansion, a quiet satisfaction settled over me. The battles, the betrayals, the long nights of planning, they had all led to this moment. I had not only won what was due to me, but had also earned something far greater: respect, validation, and the undeniable proof that I was capable of standing my ground and claiming my place in the family, once and for all. Once the dust settled, I faced a choice about what to do with the trust fund. The easy path would have been to indulge myself, to live luxuriously, and to keep every benefit close. But I wanted something different. I wanted to turn what had been a source of pain and betrayal into something meaningful. I began planning initiatives to support people who, like me, had been overlooked or underestimated, those who quietly struggled while the world's attention favored others. I established scholarships, small business grants, and community programs, carefully designed to give opportunities to those who might never have imagined them. Each decision was deliberate, a way of ensuring that the funds would not simply reward privilege, but create real change. In doing so, I felt a purpose that went far beyond money, a fulfillment rooted in justice rather than revenge. As I watched the first recipients benefit from the programs, a quiet sense of peace settled over me. Betrayal, which had once felt like a crushing weight, had transformed into motivation and resilience. I understood now that pain doesn't have to consume you. It can forge clarity, determination, and empathy. Every trick, every hidden scheme, and every slight I had endured had shaped me into someone capable of both defending herself and lifting others up. The family, observing my choices, seemed unsure how to respond. They had expected retribution or indulgence, but what they saw instead was careful thought, responsibility, and a kind of quiet strength that couldn't be ignored. I felt no need to prove anything further. The results spoke for themselves. Life had shifted in subtle but profound ways. I walked through the halls of the mansion not with fear or hesitation, but with the calm assurance that I was no longer defined by anyone else's expectations or schemes. My perspective had widened. I had seen the worst of deception and the limits of favoritism, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and purpose-driven. That evening, as I sat alone in the study, I reflected on the journey. Betrayal had tested me, patience had sharpened me, and strategy had empowered me. The trust fund, once a symbol of what could have been stolen, had become a tool for creating impact. My life, quietly and irrevocably, had changed. I was no longer the girl who could be ignored, the one who was overlooked. I had claimed my place, not through spite, but through vision. And in that moment, I felt a sense of completion and hope that would guide every choice from that day forward. Hey besties, thanks for staying with me till the end. Clara faced betrayal, manipulation, and schemes from her own family, but she turned it all around. With patience, strategy, and determination, she claimed her inheritance and transformed it into something meaningful, helping those overlooked. Her journey shows that pain can forge strength and purpose. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more.